June 5, 1944, North Wither Airfield, England. The Pathfinders. Chalk numbers scratched across olive-drab fuselages as paratroopers filed toward waiting Douglas C-47 Skytrains. Captain Frank Lillyman checked his watch. 2150 hours. First stick, 52nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, ready for loading. 18 men who would jump 30 minutes ahead of 13,000 paratroopers to mark drop zones with lights and radio beacons in occupied France. Lieutenant Colonel Joel Crouch gripped the control yoke of his C-47 as engines roared to life. 3 aircraft would depart at 5-minute intervals, carrying Pathfinder teams to predetermined coordinates behind Hitler's Atlantic Wall. What none of them knew was that this single night would trigger the most devastating airborne assault in military history, overwhelming German defenses through sheer chaos rather than precision. The Third Reich had transformed the Normandy countryside into a fortress. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's defensive strategy relied on rapid counterattack by mobile reserves positioned behind coastal fortifications. Cut those response routes, and entire defensive sectors would collapse. The Wehrmacht's 91st Air Landing Division and 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment occupied critical positions throughout the Carentan Peninsula. 7,000 German troops controlling bridges, causeways, and road junctions that connected Utah Beach to the interior of France. General Wilhelm Fall commanded these forces from his headquarters at the Château de Bernaville, positioned to respond rapidly to any Allied landing attempt. The Douglas C-47 Skytrain climbed through English darkness at 140 miles per hour. Each aircraft displaced 26,900 pounds, fully loaded. Lieutenant Colonel Crouch commanded Aircraft No. 1 of 822 C-47s that would deliver the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions into Nazi-occupied France. His aircraft carried 18 Pathfinders and equipment specifically designed to guide the main force. Eureka radar beacons, capable of transmitting signals to Rebecca receivers mounted in approaching aircraft. Holophane lights arranged in T patterns, visible from 2,000 feet altitude. The mathematics were unforgiving. Drop zones measured 1,000 yards by 600 yards. At 120 miles per hour ground speed, pilots had 15 seconds to identify the zone and give the green light. A 5-degree navigation error would scatter paratroopers across miles of enemy territory. Major General Maxwell Taylor stood before assembled officers of the 101st Airborne Division at Greenham Common Airfield. West Point class of 1922, with combat experience from Sicily and Italy. Taylor understood that airborne operations succeeded through aggressive action by scattered forces, rather than coordinated unit movements. The 100's mission encompassed 4 causeway exits connecting Utah Beach to the mainland. Each causeway crossed flooded fields that Rommel had ordered inundated to channel Allied forces into predetermined kill zones. Seize those exits, and 7th Corps could advance inland. Fail, and thousands of soldiers would die trapped on the beaches. Aboard C-47 number 429395, Lieutenant Thomas Meehan reviewed his assault plan with 17 paratroopers of Easy Company, 56th Parachute Infantry Regiment, capture the wooden bridges at La Porte, and secure Causeway number 2 by 0630 hours. Meehan had trained his men for 18 months, transforming civilians into elite airborne soldiers. But aircraft 42930-950 would never reach Drop Zone C. Anti-aircraft fire would tear through the fuselage at 11:12 hours, sending the C-47 spiraling into Norman soil near Beausville Opal. All 5 crew members and 17 paratroopers would perish in the wreckage, including Meehan and his entire headquarters element. The American Armada crossed the English Channel in formations called Cirrus, 9 aircraft in 3 elements of 3, maintaining 1,000 feet intervals between Cirrus. each serial assigned specific drop zones identified by pathfinder beacons. The system required perfect execution under ideal conditions. Conditions over Normandy were far from ideal. A cloud bank at 1,500 feet obscured visual navigation references. Ground fog reduced visibility to less than 1 mile. German radar stations tracked the approaching aircraft from 50-mile distance, alerting anti-aircraft batteries across the peninsula. At 00015 hours on June 6th, Captain Lillyman's pathfinders exited over Drop Zone A west of Sainte-Mère-Église. His Eureka beacon activated within 10 minutes, transmitting on predetermined frequencies to guide the 502nd Regiment's main force. But scattered cloud cover and enemy fire had already disrupted the formation. Only one of 5 Pathfinder teams landed within 1 mile of their assigned drop zone. Staff Sergeant John Ray commanded 3rd Squad, Company F, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 24 years old, from Glendora, California, with jump wings earned at Fort Benning. Ray's squad trained specifically for night combat, practicing assembly procedures using cricket clickers and challenge passwords. "Flash," a paratrooper would whisper in darkness. "Thunder," came the response, confirming American identity. The authentication system assumed soldiers could find each other. Ray's C-47 dropped its stick at 0 to 30 hours, 7 miles from Drop Zone N. The sergeant landed in 3 feet of water, his parachute dragging him backward through a flooded field. Emergency release mechanisms jammed with mud. Ray cut himself free with his jump knife, then spent 4 hours searching marshland for his squad. By dawn, he had found 3 men from his unit and 14 paratroopers from 5 different regiments. The lost elements would become a combat force through necessity rather than planning. At 0140 hours, the main Serals approached the Cotton Peninsula at 1,500 feet altitude. Flak batteries opened fire with 88mm and 20mm cannon, creating curtains of traces and explosions. C-47 pilots instinctively climbed or dove to avoid fire, breaking formation integrity. Aircraft separated by miles rather than yards. Navigators lost visual contact with lead planes. Radio silence prevented coordination. Jumpmasters could only estimate their position based on elapsed time from the coast. Green lights illuminated at intervals determined by dead reckoning rather than identified landmarks. Paratroopers exited into uncertainty, trusting that somewhere below lay French soil rather than the English Channel. Private John Steele, Company F, 505 Parachute Infantry Regiment, descended directly over Sainte-Mère-Église at 015 hours. The town square blazed with light from a burning building, illuminating descending paratroopers for German machine gunners. Steele's parachute snagged the church steeple, leaving him suspended 30 feet above the square. For 2 hours, the private hung motionless, watching German soldiers shoot his comrades as they landed. Wounded in the foot by shrapnel, Steele played dead until German soldiers cut him down and took him prisoner. He would escape when the 505's 3rd Battalion captured the town at 0430 hours, the first French community liberated on D-Day. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole landed 2 miles from his intended drop zone near Carentan. Commander of 3rd Battalion, 502 Parachute Infantry Regiment. Cole gathered 75 paratroopers from various units and advanced toward his objective through German positions. At 0630 hours, Cole's improvised force encountered a German strongpoint defending the highway bridge at Carentan. 4 concrete bunkers supported by mortars and machine guns. Traditional infantry doctrine required coordinated battalion attacks against fortified positions. Cole had 75 paratroopers armed with rifles, grenades, and 1 bazooka with 3 rockets. He ordered a bayonet charge across 250 yards of open ground. The attack succeeded through sheer audacity. German defenders, expecting organized resistance, broke under the psychological impact of screaming paratroopers charging with fixed bayonets.
Cole secured the bridge but paid heavily. 29 killed, 43 wounded. The colonel would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions, posthumously awarded after his death in Holland 3 months later. General d'Artillerie Erich Marx commanded German 84th Corps from his headquarters at Saint-Lô. A veteran of the Eastern Front where he lost a leg at Stalingrad, Marx understood mobile defense and maintained reserves to counter Allied landings. At 120 hours, Marx received reports of parachute landings across the Carentan Peninsula, but the reports made no tactical sense. Paratroopers identified at Carentan, Sainte-Mère-Église, Montebourg, Pont-l'Abbé, and 20 other locations simultaneously. No coherent pattern emerged from the contact reports. Were these commando raids, diversionary attacks, the main invasion? Marx faced the commander's dilemma: commit reserves against scattered paratroopers and risk having nothing to oppose beach landings, hold reserves and allow airborne forces to consolidate behind coastal defenses. Without clear intelligence, Marx ordered local commanders to contain paratrooper landings while maintaining mobile reserves. The decision reflected sound military judgment based on available information. Marx could not know that American scatter was accidental rather than intentional, creating chaos that paralyzed German response more effectively than any planned operation. Technical Sergeant Frank McKean landed in a walled garden near Turkville at 01:45 hours. Communications Sergeant Headquarters Company 5001 1st Parachute Infantry Regiment. McKean carried SCR-300 radio equipment essential for coordinating battalion operations. The sergeant found himself alone, surrounded by 8-foot walls in total darkness. Gunfire echoed from all directions. McKean attempted radio contact, but received no response. His encryption codes were useless without other radio operators. For 3 hours, McKean defended his position with his M1 Garand rifle, killing 2 German soldiers who investigated his landing site. At dawn, he linked up with 19 paratroopers assembling near a crossroads. None were from his unit.
Most had lost equipment during descent. McKay became the group's de facto commander through possession of the only functioning radio. He established contact with division headquarters at 0830 hours, reporting his position and requesting instructions. The response was simple: attack toward Poupeville, destroy any German forces encountered. The technical sergeant led his improvised platoon toward the village, engaging German patrols and capturing 32 prisoners. They reached Poupeville at 1100 hours, linking up with forces advancing from Utah Beach. McKay's radio became the primary communication link between airborne and seaborne forces, coordinating artillery support and medical evacuation. Lieutenant Colonel William Ekman commanded the 55th Parachute Infantry Regiment's most successful drop. 75% of his paratroopers landed within 1 mile of Drop Zone O near Sainte-Mère-Église. Ekman assembled 600 men within 2 hours, a remarkable achievement given weather conditions and enemy fire. The 55th's cohesion allowed execution of planned objectives. 3rd Battalion captured Serre at 0430 hours. 2nd Battalion secured the bridge at La Fière. 1st Battalion blocked German reinforcement routes from Montebourg. But success created its own challenges. The regiment held a 6-mile front with 600 paratroopers against German forces that outnumbered them 10-1. Ekman established strongpoints at critical locations, trusting isolated units to hold until relief arrived. Private First Class Leonard Goodgull manned a roadblock north of Sainte-Mère-Église with 7 paratroopers from his squad. At 0800 hours, German reconnaissance vehicles approached their position. The paratroopers destroyed the lead vehicle with bazooka fire, blocking the road. For 12 hours, Goodgull's squad repelled German probes while running critically low on ammunition. They stripped weapons from dead Germans, using captured MG-42 machine guns against their former owners. Relief arrived at 2,000 hours in the form of Sherman tanks from the 746th Tank Battalion, advancing from Utah Beach.
Goodgall had fired over 2,000 rounds, thrown 14 grenades, and helped hold a position that prevented German armor from reaching Sainte-Mère-Église during critical morning hours. The 82nd Airborne Division's drop zones lay west of the Meurthe River in terrain that appeared solid on aerial photographs but concealed extensive marshlands. Paratroopers descended into water ranging from knee-deep to over their heads. Equipment bags weighing up to 140 pounds became anchors that drowned soldiers before they could release their harnesses. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Shanley, commanding 2nd Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, landed in 4 feet of water at 0220 hours. His battalion scattered across 20 square miles of flooded terrain. Shanley spent 5 hours assembling 48 paratroopers from various units. With this makeshift force, Shanley established a defensive position on Hill 30, west of the Meurthe. For 3 days, his group would hold this critical terrain against repeated German attacks, preventing enemy forces from flanking the 82nd main positions.
The isolation was complete. No radio contact with division headquarters, no resupply of ammunition or medical supplies, no evacuation for 37 wounded paratroopers who filled a Norman farmhouse converted to an aid station. Technician 5th grade Eugene Darnell served as the only medic, treating wounds with salvaged German medical supplies and boiled cloth for bandages. When morphine ran out, Darnell could only hold men's hands as they died from untreatable wounds. Brigadier General James Gavin, Assistant Division Commander of the 82nd Airborne, jumped with the 58th Regiment at 0230 hours. At 37, Gavin was the youngest general officer in the American Army, promoted for his performance commanding the 55th Regiment in Sicily and Italy. Gavin landed in an orchard near Les Forges, assembled 12 paratroopers, and advanced toward the Meurthe River bridges. Along the route, Gavin collected scattered elements until his force numbered nearly 300 men from 6 different battalions. At the Lafayette Bridge, Gavin found a critical situation. The span controlled the only crossing of the Meurthe suitable for vehicles. German forces held the west bank with machine guns and mortars. American paratroopers controlled the east bank, but lacked heavy weapons to assault across the causeway. For 2 days, control of Lafayette seesawed between opposing forces. Paratroopers charged across the narrow causeway into machine gun fire. Germans counterattacked with self-propelled guns. Bodies accumulated in the water below until they formed improvised dams. On June 9th, Gavin personally led the final assault that secured the bridge permanently. The battle cost 254 American casualties, but opened the route for armor to support the 82nd's isolated units west of the Meurthe. Major General Wilhelm Folly commanded the 91st Air Landing Division from his headquarters at Château de Berneville. A career officer with experience from Poland, France, and Russia, Folly understood airborne operations and positioned his forces to counter parachute landings. At 0400 hours on June 6th, Folly was returning from Rennes, where a war game had been organized by the German High Command. His route took him through areas where American paratroopers had landed hours earlier. Near Poucaville, Lieutenant Malcolm Braun's patrol from Headquarters Company 3rd Battalion 58th Regiment established a hasty roadblock. As Fall's car approached at high speed, paratroopers opened fire with automatic weapons. The vehicle crashed against a wall. Fye died instantly from multiple gunshot wounds, the first German general killed on D-Day. His death eliminated coordinated command of German forces in the central Carentan, contributing to the fragmented response that allowed scattered American paratroopers to achieve their objectives. The 101st Airborne Division's assault on Causeway 2 required seizure of Poucaville village at its western terminus. Lieutenant Eugene Dance led 1st Platoon, Company B, 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment in the attack. Dance assembled 26 paratroopers near Poucaville at 0500 hours.
The village contained an estimated 40 German defenders in fortified positions. Traditional tactics required a company-strength assault with supporting weapons. Dance divided his platoon into 2 squads, attacking simultaneously from north and south. The assault began at 0530 hours, with grenades thrown through windows of occupied buildings. Paratroopers cleared houses room by room using automatic weapons and bayonets. Sergeant Elmer Murray kicked open the door of the village church, expecting to find German observers in the steeple. Instead, he discovered 60 French civilians sheltering from the battle. Murray posted guards to protect the civilians while his squad continued clearing operations. By 0800 hours, Dance's platoon controlled Poupeville, capturing 18 German prisoners and killing an estimated 20 defenders. At 0815 hours, leading elements of the 8th Infantry Regiment, advancing from Utah Beach, entered the village. The link-up between airborne and seaborne forces was complete. Dance's exhausted paratroopers had secured the critical causeway exit with half the men and none of the support weapons originally allocated for the mission. Battery positions at Sainte-Martin-de-Veravale threatened Utah Beach with 4 105mm howitzers capable of devastating naval landing craft. The 502nd Regiment's 2nd Battalion drew the mission of destroying these guns before the beach assault began. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers led a scratch force of 15 paratroopers toward the battery at 0430 hours. Summers, a coal miner from West Virginia before joining the Army, had earned his stripes through exceptional marksmanship and tactical competence.
The paratroopers discovered the battery positions empty. German forces had relocated the guns inland days earlier, anticipating airborne assault. But concrete bunkers surrounding the battery contained machine gun positions that could still threaten advancing American forces. Summers conducted a single-handed assault on the German positions that would become legendary in airborne history. Moving from bunker to bunker, he killed 31 German soldiers in 2 hours of continuous combat. His Thompson submachine gun barrel grew so hot from sustained fire that it burned his hands through leather gloves. Private John Steele followed Summers with ammunition, repeatedly exposing himself to enemy fire to resupply the sergeant's weapon. When Summers' Thompson jammed from overheating, Steele provided his own weapon and continued the ammunition supply run with a captured German MP-40. By 0700 hours, Summers had cleared 15 bunkers single-handedly. Surviving Germans abandoned their positions, retreating toward Carentan. The sergeant collapsed from exhaustion, having fired over 700 rounds and thrown 28 grenades in his solo assault. Summers would receive the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions, though many witnesses believed he deserved the Medal of Honor. He survived the war, but never fully recovered from the psychological impact of that morning's combat. The German 6th Fallschirm Regiment represented elite Wehrmacht forces specifically trained for anti-airborne operations. Commander Mayer Friedrich von de Hader had jumped into Crete in 1941, understanding both capabilities and vulnerabilities of parachute forces. Von de Hader positioned his regiment around Carentan, anticipating that Allied paratroopers would attempt to seize this critical road junction. His defensive plan relied on mobile counterattack groups supported by mortars and machine guns pre-registered on likely drop zones. At 0215 hours, von de Hader received reports of parachute landings north and east of Carentan. He immediately dispatched reconnaissance patrols while maintaining his main force in reserve. The reports revealed American paratroopers scattered across 30 kilometers with no apparent concentration. The Major faced a tactical puzzle. Were these pathfinders for a larger force, diversionary raids, lost paratroopers from missions elsewhere? Von de Hader chose aggressive reconnaissance, sending platoon-strength patrols to identify American positions while preserving his battalion reserves.
The decision proved sound but insufficient. Scattered American paratroopers coalesced into ad hoc combat groups faster than German patrols could locate and destroy them. By dawn, von Dieter's regiment faced attacks from multiple directions by forces of unknown strength. His elite Fallschar found themselves fighting the kind of confused battle they had trained to inflict on others. Technician 4th grade George Koskiaki served as radioman with Headquarters Company 101st Airborne Division. His aircraft dropped him 5 miles from the intended landing zone at 0145 hours. Koskiaki landed in an apple orchard, his SCR-300 radio intact but antenna broken during descent. For 2 hours, the radio man attempted field repairs while evading German patrols. Using communications wire from a destroyed telephone pole, he improvised an antenna that restored partial function. At 0400 hours, Koskiaki established contact with division headquarters, becoming one of the first communication links between scattered units. His position became an impromptu command post as officers arrived seeking information. Koskiaki relayed messages between isolated units, coordinated ammunition resupply requests, and provided the only reliable intelligence on German positions for 6 hours. When German mortar fire targeted his transmissions at 1000 hours, Koskiaki relocated 5 times while maintaining continuous communication. His radio log recorded 147 messages transmitted and 89 received during the first day of invasion, creating the communication network that transformed chaos into coordinated action. Captain Thomas Meehan's death in aircraft 42-93095 left Easy Company 56th Regiment leaderless at the critical moment. First Lieutenant Harry Welsh assumed command by virtue of being the senior officer to survive the drop. Welsh landed 2 miles from Drop Zone C with 7 men from his platoon. Moving toward Causeway 2, Welsh collected scattered paratroopers until his force numbered 43 men from 9 different companies. None of the soldiers had trained together, most had lost equipment during descent. Welsh possessed 1 map, 2 radios, and no heavy weapons. At 0530 hours, Welsh's group encountered German positions defending the causeway approach. Without mortars or machine guns, Welsh organized a flanking attack through flooded fields. Paratroopers waded through chest-deep water for 300 yards to reach German positions from an unexpected direction. The assault succeeded through surprise rather than firepower. Welsh's men killed 12 Germans and captured 23, securing the western approach to Causeway 2. They held this position for 4 hours against German counterattacks until relieved by forces from Utah Beach. Welsh would command Easy Company through Normandy, Holland, and Bastonia, becoming one of the most decorated officers in the 56th Regiment. His leadership on D-Day established the pattern of aggressive action by small units that characterized airborne operations throughout the European campaign. The glider assault began at 0400 hours as Waco CG-4A gliders released from C-47 tow planes at 600 feet altitude. Each glider carried 13 soldiers or equivalent weight in equipment. Jeeps, anti-tank guns, ammunition, and medical supplies descended silently through pre-dawn darkness. Landing zones were small Norman fields surrounded by hedge that had grown for centuries.
Trees 50 feet tall bordered areas barely large enough for emergency landings. Glider pilots had seconds to identify fields, avoid obstacles, and execute controlled crashes at 60 miles per hour. Flight Officer John Lawther piloted glider number 7, carrying a surgical team from the 326th Airborne Medical Company. At release altitude, Lawther saw his intended landing zone occupied by crashed gliders and burning wreckage. He banked sharply, searching for alternative fields. Ground fire punctured the glider's fabric skin. Bullets shattered the plexiglass nose, wounding Lawther in the shoulder. The co-pilot, Flight Officer Paul Zatro, took control as Lawther collapsed across the controls. Zavatro spotted a field bordered by stone walls, too small for normal landing, but the only option available. He side-slipped to lose altitude, leveled at 20 feet, and deliberately ground-looped the glider to dissipate speed.
The Waco struck the ground at 40 miles per hour, skidding sideways across wet grass. The left wing sheared off against a hedgerow, the fuselage split behind the cockpit, but the surgical team survived with minor injuries, immediately establishing an aid station that would treat 183 wounded paratroopers in the next 24 hours. Colonel Howard Johnson commanded the 5001st Parachute Infantry Regiment with aggressive leadership that bordered on reckless. Jumpy Johnson had earned his nickname through willingness to lead from the front, jumping first and fighting alongside his men. Johnson landed accurately on Drop Zone D at 0130 hours, but found himself virtually alone. His regiment had scattered across 20 miles of Norman countryside. By 0300 hours, Johnson had assembled only 150 paratroopers from an authorized strength of 2,000. Rather than wait for additional forces, Johnson attacked toward his objective at La Barquette Locks. The position controlled flooding of the Douve River Valley, critical for German defensive plans. Johnson's makeshift battalion encountered German strongpoints defended by machine guns and mortars. The colonel personally led the assault, charging across open ground with fixed bayonets. German defenders expecting organized military tactics were shattered psychologically by screaming paratroopers attacking without regard for casualties. La Barquette fell at 0500 hours, though Johnson paid heavily with 43 killed and 60 wounded from his small force. Johnson would hold La Barquette for 2 days against repeated German counterattacks, supplied only by ammunition stripped from dead soldiers. His aggressive leadership exemplified the airborne spirit that transformed potential disaster into tactical victory. Private Donald Burgett, Company A 506 Regiment, landed in a flooded field at 0117 hours, 19 years old from Detroit. Burgett had lied about his age to enlist at 17. His parachute dragged him backward through water over his head. Burgett activated the emergency release, freeing himself from the harness, but his leg bag containing ammunition and rations tore away during descent. He reached shallow water with only his rifle, bayonet, and 4 grenades. No food, no ammunition beyond one 8-round clip. Moving toward the sound of naval gunfire that indicated the coast, Burgett encountered another paratrooper stuck in a tree. Private Robert Leonard hung 20 feet up, unable to free himself from tangled suspension lines. German voices approached through the darkness. Burgett climbed the tree, cutting Leonard free with his jump knife. Both men dropped to the ground as German soldiers entered the field. For 10 minutes, they lay motionless in tall grass while Germans searched for paratroopers. Leonard had broken his ankle in the fall, but remained silent despite intense pain. After the Germans passed, Burgett fashioned a splint from rifle cleaning rods and parachute silk. He half-carried Leonard 2 miles to an aid station established in a Norman farmhouse. Along the route, they killed 3 German soldiers and collected weapons and ammunition that Burgett would use in the capture of Causeway 4. Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Cassidy commanded 1st Battalion 522nd Regiment with tactical precision that contrasted with Johnson's aggressive style. Cassidy landed near Fouquerville at 0140 hours, immediately establishing a battalion command post in a destroyed farmhouse. Using red signal lamps and whistle blasts, Cassidy assembled 225 paratroopers by 0300 hours. He organized them into provisional companies based on available weapons, rather than unit designation. Machine gun teams formed from whoever carried ammunition. Bazooka teams paired gunners with ammunition bearers, regardless of parent unit. Cassidy's objective was the northern exit of Causeway 4, defended by 2 German companies with supporting artillery. Rather than direct assault, Cassidy executed a double envelopment, sending forces around both flanks while demonstrating against the center. The maneuver succeeded brilliantly. German forces focused on the demonstration failed to detect flanking movements until paratroopers attacked from the rear. The position fell at 0630 hours with minimal American casualties. Cassidy captured 147 German prisoners and 4 artillery pieces that he turned against enemy positions. The colonel's tactical competence preserved combat power for subsequent operations. His battalion maintained organizational integrity throughout D-Day, providing the coherent force that linked scattered airborne elements into effective combat units. Rommel had ordered obstacles placed in Normandy fields to prevent glider landings. Rommel's asparagus consisted of poles 12 feet tall, some connected by wire, others topped with mines. The obstacles forced gliders into violent evasive maneuvers at landing speeds. Glider number 47 carried Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, commanding 3rd Battalion, 55th Regiment. The Waco approached landing zone E at 0410 hours. Pilot Charles Young wrestling with controls as ground fire severed cables. Young saw the poles too late to avoid them. The glider's left wing struck a pole, spinning the aircraft 90 degrees. The nose dug into soft earth, catapulting the glider end over end. Vandervoort was thrown through the nose section, breaking his leg in a compound fracture. Despite intense pain, Vandervoort established his command post and directed battalion operations for 3 days without medical evacuation. Moving on a commandeered motorcycle with his broken leg splinted to the frame, he led his battalion in capturing Sainte-Mère-Église and defending against German counterattacks. His refusal to evacuate despite severe injury inspired paratroopers to extraordinary efforts. When German armor threatened to overrun his positions on June 7th, Vandervoort personally directed bazooka teams that destroyed 6 tanks at ranges under 50 yards. Technical Sergeant Robert Bob Nylund, Company D 505 Regiment, landed accurately on drop zone O at 0130 hours. 25 years old, from Tonawanda, New York, one of 4 brothers serving in World War II, Nylund's squad drew the mission of defending positions near Neuville-à-Plaine. Moving through hedgerow country in darkness, Nylund's platoon took defensive positions to guard the northern approaches while the main force dealt with German counterattacks from the south. When 2 German companies advanced toward their position, the paratroopers fought desperately to hold them off. At dawn, Nylund's platoon found themselves under intense pressure from elements of the German forces. The sergeant volunteered to stay behind with 2 other paratroopers to cover his unit's withdrawal towards Sainte-Mère-Église while protecting 28 wounded men and a medic. For several hours, Nylund manned a machine gun against overwhelming odds. Ammunition ran critically low by noon. Nylund continued firing to allow his comrades to escape. He was killed in action on June 6, dying at his machine gun position after enabling his unit's successful withdrawal. Nylund's sacrifice allowed his platoon to escape and link up with battalion forces. His mother would receive notification of his death at the same time she learned another son, Lieutenant Preston Nylund, had been killed on June 7 near Utah Beach. His brother Edward was reported missing in Burma, though he would later be found alive in a Japanese POW camp. The tragedy inspired the sole survivor policy that would send their brother Frederick home from combat duty. Major General Don Pratt, Assistant Division Commander of the 101st Airborne, led the glider assault scheduled for dawn on D-Day.
Pratt's glider approached landing zone E at 0440 hours, carrying division staff and communication equipment essential for coordinating scattered forces. The landing zone was marked by burning vehicles and crashed gliders from earlier arrivals. Pilot Emile Natal searched for clear ground but found only small gaps between obstacles. He aimed for a hedge field, committing to landing despite visible poles and wires. The glider struck the ground at 70 miles per hour, too fast for the field's length. Natal applied full brake to the landing skids, creating showers of sparks as metal scraped across stones. The Waco slammed into a hedgerow at 40 miles per hour. The impact crushed the cockpit section, killing Pratt instantly. He became the highest-ranking Allied officer killed on D-Day, his death eliminating experienced leadership when the 101st most needed coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard assumed Pratt's duties, establishing division headquarters in a farmhouse near Hayesville while under German artillery fire.
The 57th Parachute Infantry Regiment experienced the worst drop of D-Day. Intended for Drop Zone T, west of the Murderette River, the regiment scattered across flooded marshlands that did not appear on aerial reconnaissance photographs. Private Edward Jezioski dropped into water over his head at 0240 hours. Weighted by equipment, he sank immediately. His parachute canopy spread across the surface, trapping him underwater. Jezioski cut himself free, but could not surface through the tangled silk. Lungs burning, vision fading, he pulled himself hand over hand along suspension lines until reaching the canopy's edge. Jezioski broke the surface, gasping, surrounded by darkness and the sounds of drowning men. He heard cries for help, but could barely keep himself afloat. For 3 hours, Jezioski struggled through marsh, using his rifle as a walking stick to test depth. He rescued 2 paratroopers trapped in trees, their weight nearly drowning all 3 before reaching solid ground. By dawn, they had collected 11 survivors from various units, none with functioning weapons after immersion. Estimates of drowning deaths in the 57th ranged from a few to scores. The exact number would never be known. Bodies recovered weeks later from marshlands, identification impossible after prolonged immersion. Young men who traveled 3,000 miles to die in 3 feet of water, victims of faulty intelligence rather than enemy action. Captain Ben Schwarzwalder commanded Company G507th Regiment with tactical innovation that maximized limited resources. The former college football coach from West Virginia University applied athletic training principles to military operations. Schwarzwalder landed in waist-deep water at 0235 hours, immediately recognizing the disastrous scatter of his company. Rather than search for his men in darkness, he established a rallying point using a hunting horn he carried for such contingencies.
The horn blasts attracted 43 paratroopers by 0400 hours. Schwarzwalder organized them into fire teams based on available weapons, creating interlocking fields of fire around a Norman farmhouse. When German forces attacked at dawn, the paratroopers held their position through disciplined fire control. Short bursts, pick your targets, make every round count, Schwarzwalder commanded, conserving ammunition while maximizing enemy casualties. The position became a collection point for scattered paratroopers throughout June 6th. By evening, Schwarzwalder commanded 186 men from 12 different units. He organized them into a provisional company that captured the Lafier Bridge Causeway on June 9th, leading the assault that opened the western route for American armor. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Krauss commanded 3rd Battalion 505 Regiment with the specific mission of capturing Sainte-Mère-Église. Cannonball Krauss had earned his nickname through aggressive leadership in Sicily and Italy, always attacking regardless of odds. Krauss assembled 97 paratroopers near Sainte-Mère-Église by 0300 hours. The town contained an estimated 100 German defenders, but Krauss refused to wait for reinforcements. He divided his force into 3 groups, attacking simultaneously from different directions. The assault began at 0430 hours, with grenades thrown into German positions around the town square. Paratroopers cleared buildings methodically, using automatic weapons and cold steel in close-quarter combat. The church where Private Steele had hung became a strong point as paratroopers established machine gun positions in the steeple. German resistance collapsed within 30 minutes. Confused by attacks from multiple directions, defenders retreated toward Carentan, abandoning weapons and equipment. Krauss raised an American flag over the town hall at 0500 hours, the first Allied flag to fly over liberated French territory. But holding Sainte-Mère-Église proved harder than capturing it. German counterattacks began at 0900 hours with infantry supported by self-propelled guns. Krauss's depleted battalion faced odds of 10 to 1, defending a perimeter too large for available forces.
Private William Tucker manned a roadblock south of town with 6 paratroopers when German armor approached at 1400 hours. Without anti-tank weapons, Tucker improvised. He filled wine bottles with gasoline from a destroyed German vehicle, creating Molotov cocktails. As the lead German assault gun passed his position, Tucker leaped onto its deck, pouring burning gasoline through open hatches. The crew evacuated as flames engulfed the interior. Tucker destroyed 2 more vehicles before shrapnel from an 88mm shell severed his left arm at the elbow. Despite his wound, Tucker continued fighting with his rifle braced against a wall, firing one-handed until relieved by tanks from Utah Beach at 1700 hours. His roadblock had held for 3 hours against battalion-strength attacks, preventing German armor from retaking Sainte-Mère-Église during critical afternoon hours. The German 1/5th Grenadier Regiment launched the first major counterattack against American airborne forces at 0600 hours on June 6.
2 battalions of infantry supported by assault guns advanced from Montebourg towards Sainte-Mère-Église. General James Gavin had anticipated this attack, positioning blocking forces along probable routes, but his scattered paratroopers could only establish isolated strongpoints rather than continuous defensive lines. The Germans advanced between positions, threatening to isolate forward elements. Sergeant Otis Sampson commanded an outpost north of Sainte-Marie with 10 paratroopers and 1 machine gun. At 0630 hours, his position was overrun by 2 German companies. Sampson ordered his men to withdraw while he covered their retreat with the machine gun. For 20 minutes, Sampson held his position alone, killing an estimated 30 German soldiers before running out of ammunition. When Germans finally overran the position, they found Sampson dead beside his weapon, surrounded by expended brass casings and empty ammunition boxes. His sacrifice delayed the German advance long enough for Gavin to establish a secondary defensive line. The 1058th Regiment reached Sainte-Mère-Église outskirts at 0800 hours, but encountered Sherman tanks advancing from Utah Beach. The German attack dissolved under coordinated tank infantry assault, leaving 450 casualties. Supply operations for scattered airborne forces required extraordinary improvisation. Transport aircraft attempted resupply drops on June 7th, but without functioning radio beacons or marked drop zones, accuracy proved impossible. Mission Memphis, intended for the 101st Airborne Division, scattered bundles across 40 square miles of countryside. Paratroopers watched desperately needed ammunition and medical supplies descend into German-held territory or sink in flooded fields. Captain Frank Strabel organized salvage operations using French civilians and captured German vehicles. His salvage teams retrieved less than 30% of dropped supplies, competing with German patrols seeking the same materials. Several firefights erupted over supply bundles, with both sides recognizing their critical importance. The supply shortage forced paratroopers to extraordinary measures. They stripped German dead of ammunition, converting to enemy weapons when American ammunition was exhausted. Medical supplies were gathered from German aid stations, sometimes while under fire from the original owners. Private First Class Joseph Lesnowski became his unit's primary supplier through aggressive scavenging. The former factory worker from Michigan had an instinct for locating useful materials. He recovered a German field kitchen that fed 60 paratroopers for 3 days. He found a Wehrmacht ammunition depot that provided machine gun ammunition when American supplies were exhausted. Lesnowski's most valuable discovery came on June 8th when he located a German medical supply truck abandoned in a ditch. The vehicle contained surgical instruments, morphine, and bandages that saved dozens of American lives. He drove the truck to 3 aid stations while still wearing Wehrmacht insignia, twice passing through German checkpoints by pretending to be a captured driver under guard. The human cost mounted throughout June 6th as isolated battles raged across the Cotentin Peninsula. The The 101st Airborne Division suffered 1,240 casualties, including 182 killed, 557 wounded, and 501 missing. Many of the missing had drowned in flooded fields, their bodies not recovered for weeks. The 82nd Airborne Division lost 1,259 men, including 156 killed, 347 wounded, and 756 missing. These numbers represented only confirmed casualties. Hundreds of paratroopers remained unaccounted for, scattered in isolated groups fighting private wars against German forces. Aircraft losses were equally severe. 42 C-47s were shot down or crashed, each carrying a crew of 5 and up to 18 paratroopers. Hundreds of gliders were destroyed on landing, their wooden frames offering no protection against German fire or impact with obstacles. But the casualty figures failed to capture the mission's success. 13,000 American paratroopers had created chaos across 60 miles of German-held territory. They had seized causeway exits, destroyed communications, blocked reinforcement routes, and paralyzed German response to the beach landings. General Eisenhower had predicted up to 80% casualties among airborne forces. Actual losses were under 50%, heavy but sustainable. More importantly, the paratroopers had achieved their primary objective, preventing German reserves from reaching the beach landings during critical morning hours. Lieutenant Colonel Joel Crouch reflected on the mission while flying his damaged C-47 back to England. 3 engines running, 1 propeller feathered after flak damage, hydraulic fluid leaking from severed lines, radio operator dead at his position, killed by shell fragments that penetrated the fuselage. Crouch had delivered his pathfinders successfully, but at what cost? The scattered drops that seemed like failure had created unexpected success. German commanders could not identify main effort from diversion, paralyzing their response more effectively than any planned operation. The mathematics of airborne warfare had proven both right and wrong. Drop zone accuracy was indeed critical for unit cohesion, but the fog of war had transformed scattered paratroopers into a weapon more powerful than concentrated forces. Small groups attacking from unexpected directions created psychological impact beyond their numerical strength. Executive Officer Williamson of the USS England would have appreciated the parallel. His submarine hunting success came from mathematical precision and technological superiority. The airborne success came from chaos and individual initiative. Both approaches had their place in modern warfare. The liberation of France had begun in darkness and confusion, with young men falling from the sky into an uncertain fate. They had trained for coordinated operations, but fought isolated battles. They had prepared for organized warfare, but achieved victory through chaos.
By dawn on June 7th, the surviving paratroopers had coalesced into effective fighting forces. Scattered elements became provisional battalions, isolated strongpoints linked into defensive lines. Radio communications restored command and control. The airborne divisions that had ceased to exist as organized units on the night of June 5th had reformed through sheer determination. Colonel William Ekman stood in the square of Sainte-Mère-Église on the morning of June 7th, watching tanks from the 4th Infantry Division rumble through the town. His 505th Regiment had held the first liberated French town against repeated counterattacks. The link-up between airborne and seaborne forces was complete, but Ekman knew the cost. His regiment had jumped with 2,556 men. He could account for fewer than 700. Some were dead, their bodies scattered across Normandy fields. Some were wounded, filling aid stations in farmhouses and barns. Many were simply missing, fighting with other units or hiding from German patrols. The colonel watched a French woman place flowers on the body of a paratrooper killed during the night battle. She wept as she arranged the blooms, mourning a young American who had died liberating her village. The scene repeated across the Carentan as French civilians emerged from cellars to find their communities freed, but damaged, their liberators both saviors and casualties of war.
Private John Steele returned to the church where he had hung for 2 hours on D-Day morning. His foot had healed from the shrapnel wound, though he still limped. The dummy paratrooper that would one day hang from the steeple in his honor was decades in the future. For now, there were only memories of friends who had died in the square below. Steele entered the church, removing his helmet in respect. Bullet holes scarred the walls. Blood stained the floor where wounded had been treated. But morning sunlight streamed through damaged windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny parachutes descending through golden air. The private knelt in a pew, not from religious conviction, but from exhaustion and emotion. He had survived when so many had died. He had witnessed history from a unique perspective, suspended between heaven and earth while battle raged below. The memory would haunt him for the remaining 25 years of his life. General Eisenhower visited the 82nd Airborne Division on June 8th, touring positions around Sainte-Mère-Église. He stopped at an aid station where technician 5th grade Eugene Darnell continued treating wounded after 72 hours without sleep. "How are you holding up, son?" Eisenhower asked. "Still vertical, General," Darnell replied, not looking up from the chest wound he was bandaging. Eisenhower watched the medic work with hands that trembled from exhaustion but remained steady when touching wounded flesh. Here was the reality of airborne warfare.
Not the glorified image of elite warriors descending from the sky, but exhausted young men doing impossible jobs because necessity demanded nothing less. The Supreme Commander had authorized the airborne assault, knowing the risks. He had written a statement accepting full responsibility if the invasion failed, acknowledging that scattered paratroopers might be destroyed piecemeal. Instead, those scattered forces had achieved tactical surprise that contributed decisively to invasion success. The lesson would influence military doctrine for generations. Concentration of force remained a principle of warfare, but chaos could be a weapon when properly employed. Elite forces inserted behind enemy lines could achieve effects disproportionate to their numbers through aggressive action and individual initiative. By June 10th, the 2 airborne divisions had consolidated their positions and linked with forces advancing inland from the beaches. The 101st controlled the southern Carentan Peninsula, securing the right flank of 7th Corps. The 82nd held the center, protecting critical road junctions and river crossings. But the paratroopers who had jumped on June 5th were fundamentally changed. They had experienced combat's ultimate test, fighting alone in darkness against superior forces. Those who survived carried a confidence that would sustain them through 11 more months of European combat. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers never spoke publicly about his single-handed assault on German bunkers. When asked about his actions, he would only say, "I did what needed doing." The nightmares that woke him screaming for the rest of his life told a different story. The cost of extraordinary valor was paid nightly in cold sweats and remembered violence. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole led his battalion through France until killed by a sniper in Holland on September 18, 1944. His Medal of Honor citation described his bayonet charge at Carentan, but could not capture the desperation that drove him to such extreme action. Cole had simply run out of options except forward movement and violence. Private Donald Burgett survived the war, returning to Detroit, where he worked in automotive factories and wrote memoirs about his airborne service. His books captured the fear and exhilaration of parachute warfare, the brotherhood forged in combat, and the price paid by teenage soldiers thrust into history. Technical Sergeant Frank McCann received a battlefield commission for his actions on D-Day, ending the war as a captain. He never forgot the isolation of those first hours, alone in a walled garden while unseen battles raged around him. The experience taught him that warfare was ultimately individual, fought by single soldiers making personal decisions under impossible circumstances.
The two airborne divisions would jump again in September 1944 during Operation Market Garden, the failed attempt to seize bridges across Holland. They would hold Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, earning immortality for their defense of that surrounded city. They would jump across the Rhine River in March 1945, the last major airborne operation in Europe. But nothing would match the desperate intensity of those June nights over Normandy. 13,000 young Americans falling through darkness toward an uncertain landing, each man alone with his fears during the eternal seconds of descent. Each parachute a fragile silk umbrella supporting hopes for survival. The scattered drops that seemed like tactical failure had created strategic success. German commanders, unable to identify patterns in the chaos, had hesitated at the critical moment. That hesitation allowed assault forces to establish beachheads that would grow into the liberation of Western Europe. Colonel Joel Crouch retired from the Air Force in 1962, his C-47 pilot days long behind him, but he kept a photograph on his desk, his aircraft on the runway at North Wither, pathfinders boarding for the flight to France. Young faces, eager and anxious, unaware that within hours they would be scattered across enemy territory. Crouch often studied that photograph, remembering the weight of responsibility he felt that night. He had delivered those young men to their destiny, releasing them into darkness over Normandy. Some had died on landing. Others had fought isolated battles that would never be fully documented. A few had become heroes whose names would be remembered, but most had simply done their duty under extraordinary circumstances, anonymous paratroopers who had overwhelmed German defenses through sheer audacity rather than overwhelming force. They had validated the airborne concept through blood and courage, transforming military doctrine through practical demonstration. The memorial at Sainte-Mère-Église records the names of paratroopers who died liberating the town. Bronze plaques list soldiers from across America who traveled thousands of miles to die in Norman hedgerows. Their sacrifice is marked by the dummy paratrooper hanging from the church steeple, an eternal reminder of John Steele's 2 hours suspended between life and death. But the true memorial exists in the freedom their sacrifice purchased. French children who would grow up free rather than under Nazi occupation, American families who would welcome home survivors rather than mourn endless casualties from prolonged warfare.